The air is sharp with smoke and dust, shields clatter, and somewhere ahead a clay pot bursts, spilling flame across packed earth as men scatter on instinct alone. You are not standing in a heroic tableau of bronze and banners. You are caught in the confusion of a Greek skirmish, and you probably wouldn't survive long here. This is the world where Peltasts and Firepots mattered, messy, fast, and terrifyingly intimate, far from the neat geometry of heavy infantry warfare. Historically, Greek Peltasts emerged most clearly in the late 5th century BCE, during the Peloponnesian War, when Athens and Sparta learned that hoplites alone could not decide every fight. Light-armed troops carrying javelins, small pelt shields, and occasionally incendiary firepots were deployed to harass, delay, and fracture heavier enemies. Thucydides' account of the Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BCE is a key example. Athenian light troops swarmed Spartan hoplites, denying them close combat and exhausting them through constant missile pressure. This was not bravery measured in shield wall endurance, but in stamina, timing, and nerve. Firepots, simple ceramic vessels filled with pitch, resin, or oil, fit naturally into this style of fighting. Thrown rather than launched, they were unreliable as killing tools, but devastating as psychological weapons. Scholars still debate how common they were, but archaeological finds and literary hints suggest their role was to break cohesion, not bodies, against a phalanx trained to trust its neighbor's shield. Even a brief eruption of flame could create hesitation. The strength of this system lay in mobility and choice. Peltasts could engage or disengage at will. Its weakness was obvious. If caught, they were vulnerable. The soldiers themselves required unusual skills by Greek standards: speed, endurance, spatial awareness, and individual judgment. A lesser-known detail is that many Peltasts were mercenaries from Thrace, whose warfare traditions prized ambush over formation, a point often raised in academic debate when comparing Greek skirmishers to Persian or later Roman light infantry. Already, the battlefield is changing, and the heavy troops have not yet realized how fragile their dominance can be. The smoke has barely cleared when the Peltasts are already moving again, feet light on broken ground, eyes fixed on the slow advance of bronze and ashwood behind them. There is no pause to reform ranks, no shouted cadence. Survival depends on reading the battlefield moment by moment. This kind of warfare demanded a different kind of soldier, and that difference began long before the first javelin was thrown. Peltasts were not trained in the civic gymnasia that produced hoplites. Many were professional fighters, often from Thrace or other northern regions, where light infantry traditions were deeply rooted. Xenophon, in his accounts of the 10,000, repeatedly notes how invaluable such troops were during retreats and skirmishes. Their training emphasized endurance, running, rapid throwing, and coordinated withdrawal skills essential when facing heavy troops, who could kill them with ease at close range. Firepots added another layer of complexity: timing, wind awareness, and the judgment to know when fear mattered more than accuracy. As a battlefield system, Peltast warfare functioned like controlled irritation. They advanced in loose order, loosed missiles, and withdrew before contact, forcing heavy infantry to break formation or accept constant losses and fatigue. The strength of this approach was flexibility. The weakness was dependence on space and discipline. Without room to maneuver or against well-protected cavalry, Peltasts could be neutralized quickly. A lesser-known side fact is that some Peltasts carried extra cloaks or hides, used both to pad their arms during throwing and to smother small fires if an enemy firepot burst nearby. This hints at an evolving counter-skill set within skirmisher warfare itself. Academically, there's debate over whether Peltasts represented a revolution or merely an auxiliary arm, especially when compared to Persian Takabara troops or later Roman velites. What is clear is that their success relied on individual initiative, balanced with group awareness, a difficult combination that only constant practice could produce. In a world dominated by heavy infantry ideology, these soldiers thrived by refusing to fight properly, and that refusal was their greatest weapon. A clay vessel spins through the air, ungainly and slow, and for a heartbeat it seems almost harmless before it shatters and fire blooms outward, forcing armored men to recoil despite their shields. Firepots were not common battlefield tools, but when they appeared, they changed behavior instantly. Their role is best understood not as a weapon of destruction, but as a trigger for disorder. One of the clearest historical references comes from later classical and early Hellenistic siege warfare, such as during the conflicts among Alexander's successors, where incendiaries were used to deny ground or disrupt formations. While open field use is harder to document, scholars infer their presence from tactical descriptions of sudden panic and broken cohesion. Especially in skirmish-heavy engagements, the army functioned by integrating firepots into the harassment cycle, javelins to fix attention, firepots to provoke reaction, then rapid withdrawal before retaliation. The strength of firepots lay in psychology. Flames ignore armor logic, they exploit instinct. Heavy troops trained to advance steadily could be halted or diverted, even briefly, by the fear of burning equipment or loss of formation. Their weakness was inconsistency. Poor throws, damp materials, or unfavorable wind could render them useless or even dangerous to the user. Using them required skill beyond strength, judgment, coordination, and environmental awareness. A lesser-known fact is that some firepots included quicklime or sulfur compounds, creating choking smoke rather than sustained flame. This supports academic debate over whether their primary purpose was visual terror rather than physical damage, compared to later Byzantine Greek fire. These early incendiaries were crude, yet conceptually similar in their emphasis on fear and control when compared to Persian or Carthaginian incendiary practices. Greek firepots appear limited, but contextually clever, fitting the skirmisher mindset perfectly. They were tools of opportunity, not doctrine. In the hands of Peltasts, they amplified disruption, buying moments, sometimes just seconds, that could unravel the confidence of heavier troops and shift the momentum of an otherwise evenly matched fight. The phalanx advances like a wall, shields overlapping, spears leveled, yet its strength depends entirely on cohesion. Once that unity fractures, even slightly, the formation becomes clumsy and exposed. Peltasts understood this vulnerability better than anyone, and they built their tactics around exploiting it rather than confronting it head-on. The Battle of Lechium in 390 BCE stands as a textbook example. Here, Athenian Peltasts under Iphicrates annihilated a Spartan Mora without ever accepting close combat. Constant missile fire, feigned retreats, and sudden returns wore down the hoplites, who repeatedly attempted to charge and reform. Each effort cost them energy and order. Firepots, when used, likely served to intensify moments of hesitation, forcing shield bearers to break alignment. This was not a fluke, but a demonstration of system versus system. Functionally, the army operated as a layered threat, skirmishers probing, retreating, and re-engaging while heavier units stayed safely behind or never engaged at all. The strength of this approach was efficiency, minimal losses for maximal disruption. Its weakness lay in dependency on discipline. If Peltasts panicked or missed into withdrawal, the phalanx could still crush them. The soldiers needed exceptional battlefield literacy, reading enemy intent, terrain, and fatigue. Unlike hoplites, who relied on collective momentum, Peltasts relied on anticipation. A strange side detail is that some Peltast leaders used flute signals, not for morale but to coordinate rhythm in advances and withdrawals, an inversion of hoplite musical tradition. In academic debate, this battle is often compared to Roman manipular flexibility or Persian skirmisher-heavy doctrines. Critics argue that Peltasts only succeeded under ideal conditions, while others see Lechium as proof that heavy infantry supremacy was conditional. Either way, the lesson was clear. The phalanx could be broken without ever being breached, and fire, speed, and patience were enough to undo centuries of armored confidence. By now, the heavy troops have learned the lesson the hard way. Standing still invites exhaustion, charging invites humiliation, and neither guarantees safety. Skirmish warfare forced adaptation, and the ancient battlefield became an arms race of countermeasures, rather than a contest of single ideals. Peltasts and their firepots thrived in this unstable middle ground, but not without limits. Historically, the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE show heavy infantry responding with combined arms solutions. Spartan reforms after repeated skirmishing defeats included increased use of light troops and cavalry screens, while Macedonian armies under Philip II integrated Peltasts directly into their tactical doctrine. Armies now functioned as ecosystems. Skirmishers screened advances, heavy infantry held ground, and cavalry punished overextension. In such systems, firepots lost some of their shock value, but retained situational usefulness. The strengths of Peltast tactics remain speed, adaptability, and low logistical burden. They could operate where hoplites struggled rough terrain, narrow passes, and prolonged harassment campaigns. Their weaknesses became clearer as well. Against disciplined missile troops, cavalry, or fortifications, Peltasts were less effective. Firepots, in particular, were difficult to transport in quantity and offered diminishing returns once enemies learned to anticipate them. Skill requirements evolved accordingly. Peltasts now needed coordination with other units, not just individual judgment. They trained to protect retreats, identify moments for decisive pressure, and resist the temptation to overcome it. A lesser-known detail is that some Hellenistic armies standardized firepot designs to improve reliability. An early attempt at weapon system optimization rarely mentioned outside specialist studies. Academically, this period fuels debate over whether skirmishers drove innovation or merely filled gaps left by heavy infantry. Comparisons are often drawn to Roman velites or Numidian javelinmen, with disagreement over whether Greek light troops were uniquely transformative. What is undeniable is that pure Peltast dominance was fleeting. Their success forced change, and once change arrived, their role shifted from disruptor-in-chief to essential, but no longer decisive, component of a more complex battlefield logic. The battlefield grows quieter as formations settle into new patterns, and what once felt like improvisation hardens into doctrine. Peltasts, once peripheral and mistrusted, are now expected parts of an army's structure, their methods absorbed even by those who once dismissed them. Firepots, too, fade from novelty into niche utility, remembered less for their flames than for what they revealed about fear and control. By the Hellenistic period, especially in the armies of Alexander and his successors, light troops operated in close coordination with phalangites and cavalry. At battles such as Gaugamela in 331 BCE, skirmishers screened advances, disrupted enemy light forces, and protected flanks. Though firepots played little recorded role in such large-scale engagements, the army functioned as an integrated machine, where disruption was one tool among many rather than a standalone strategy. The enduring strength of Peltast-style tactics lay in their adaptability. Even when their weapons changed from javelins to slings, from firepots to caltrops, the core logic remained: deny the enemy comfort, rhythm, and certainty. Their weakness was institutional. Once formalized, skirmishers lost some of the freedom that made them dangerous. Discipline increased survivability, but reduced improvisation. The skills required now included coordination across unit types, signal recognition, and restraint. No longer lone harassers, Peltasts had to think in terms of timing within a broader plan. A strange side note is that Hellenistic military manuals rarely mention firepots explicitly, suggesting either their decline or their classification as situational tools, unworthy of doctrinal status. Academic debate continues over whether Peltasts should be seen as evolutionary dead ends or as ancestors of modern light infantry concepts. Comparisons to Roman auxiliaries or even early modern skirmish lines are common, though contested. What remains clear is that they permanently undermine the myth of heavy infantry invincibility. Fire and flight taught ancient armies that morale, cohesion, and perception were as fragile as any shield and far harder to repair once broken. Greek firepots and Peltasts were never about raw destruction. They were about forcing decisions under pressure. Their true effectiveness lay in exposing the hidden assumptions of heavy infantry warfare. That order could always be maintained, that courage equaled cohesion, and that battle was decided only at arm's length. By attacking those assumptions, skirmishers reshaped how ancient armies thought. Measured narrowly, firepots were unreliable weapons with limited physical impact. Measured psychologically and tactically, they were force multipliers in the hands Of skilled Peltasts, they amplified disruption, magnified fear, and bought precious moments against stronger foes. Peltasts themselves proved that speed, judgment, and endurance could rival armor in mass, at least under the right conditions. Their greatest success was not permanent dominance, but enforced adaptation. Heavy troops survived by changing, integrating light forces, and abandoning rigid purity. In that sense, Peltasts won by making themselves less decisive over time. They forced complexity onto the battlefield, and complexity favored thinking commanders over tradition-bound ones. Ultimately, Greek Firepots and Peltasts remind us that warfare is not a contest of equipment alone, but of perception, training, and adaptability. Against heavy troops, they showed that the mind breaks before the body, and once it does, no amount of bronze can fully protect you.